Hi, my name is Charlie Olson.
Hello, my name is John Duffy.
Welcome to the Environment TV. This is our weekly news show.
In the short time that we have with you right now,
there are more environmental topics than we can cover.
But we would like to touch on topics that are most interest to you.
And it's possible to do that, but only if we have your help.
So, if there's a particular story of interest to you,
contact us.
Or research and write about it.
Or Skype. Or send us an audio news report from wherever you are.
We hope to shed some light on many environmental issues.
And hope that you can join us.
So please,
sit back now and watch this week's weekly news show. Thank you.
Today we're at Fort Tryon Park in Manhattan, overlooking the beautiful Hudson River. And this is Mercy Van Vlack for the Environment Weekly TV News. This is the bee report. Bee-killing pesticides are linked to lower farmland bird populations. You're worried about the bees? Well, now we have to worry about the birds as well. Pesticides don't just harm bees, but also reduce populations of farmland birds. Researchers at the Radboud University in Nijmegen and the Dutch Center for Field Ornithology and BirdLife Netherlands, SOVON, said that use of a certain class of pesticides in farms has reduced bird populations in the area. This comes from a National Geographic report. For the study, researchers compared long-term data sets for insect-eating bird populations and chemical concentration of surface water. They found that high concentrations of imidacloprid, a common neonicotinoid pesticide, was linked to a reduction in bird numbers by 3.5% per year. Around 20 nanograms of neonicotinoid per liter of water led to a 30% decline in bird population over 10 years. Researchers found that in some areas the concentration was up to 50 times higher. That is why it is so disturbing. There is an incredible amount of imidacloprid in the water, Hans de Kroon, an ecologist at Radboud University in the Netherlands, told The Guardian. And it is not likely these effects will be restricted to birds. Bye bye birdie, neonics got you now. The new Nature paper shows strong evidence that neonicotinoids are dangerous even if not ingested. The study looked at population statistics for over a dozen species of birds common to farmlands in the Netherlands. Most of these species are dependent on insects for all of part of their diet, although some also munch on seeds and grains. This means that there are two ways neonicotinoids could be harming the Netherlands birds, and ours. It's not just in the Netherlands. The first is ingestion. Studies have shown that while neonicotinoids are commonly considered to be safer for mammals and birds than for insects, they can still be lethal in high enough doses. And the best way to get a concentrated dose of neonicotinoids is to eat seeds coated with them. A 1992 study by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency found that sparrows have difficulty flying after consuming a tiny amount of imidacloprid and become immobile at higher doses. The second way neonicotinoids can affect birds is by eliminating their food sources. Since the pesticides kill target and non-target species alike, there are fewer flies, grasshoppers, stink bugs, and caterpillars for the birds to feast on. Rachel Carson had talked about insect-killing chemicals and their effects on the environment in her book, Silent Spring. I think there is a parallel, of course, said Rudd Fuppen, an ornithologist at SOVON and a co-author of the paper, National Geographic reported. It's well past time for the United States to step up and curb the impacts of bee-toxic pesticides, like neonics, from killing more bees and birds and contaminating our environment. We need your help to put pressure on President Obama and the administration to make sure they do the right thing and protect pollinators from bee-toxic pesticides. Urge President Obama to take meaningful steps to curb the impacts of pesticides on bees and other pollinators. Email whitehouse.gov to contact President Obama about this. This report is from the Center for Food Safety. Big news! From the U.S. and Mexico. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, FWS, has announced that genetically engineered crops and bee and bird toxic neonicotinoid pesticides will be banned in national wildlife refuges. Thank goodness. The ruling impacts more than 150 million acres of federal land. Meanwhile, beekeepers in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula are celebrating a major victory over Monsanto. A district judge withdrew the corporate giant's permit to plant genetically engineered Roundup-ready soybeans on 625,000 acres of cropland. The judge was convinced by scientific evidence demonstrating that GMO crops pose a major threat to honey production. Watch out for Roundup, it's deadly to bees. Soybeans treated have nectar and pollen with neonics in every part of the plant, the leaves, the stem, so it kills the bugs, but it kills the bees. This is huge for the birds and the bees, and for us. Yours for healthy people and a healthy planet, from Ocean Robin.
I'm here in Fort Tryon Park, overlooking the Hudson River in northern Manhattan in New York City. Late August, early September is bald eagle migration, and in fact we had one flying by. And in fact I think she was fishing because at one point she went very low right over the river. An update on the September 21st climate march. There will be a nuke-free, carbon-free dedicated block in the march area. It was originally proposed as a feeder march, but cops won't issue feeder march permits. So I can't tell you what the feeder marches are going to be or where they're coming from. Join us. Bring flags, bring banners, join the listserv. Check the NEAR's website, www.nirs.org. And of course the Climate March website, peoplesclimatemarch.org. Join us in New York City, September 21st, that's a Sunday, from noon until the evening. Come to the Climate Convergence the day before, different parts of the city. It's going to be an environmental weekend like you wouldn't believe. When you hear from people who were there, you're going to wish you were too.
The overview, I think, is a very simple one. As the chairman summed it up, we know we have a major problem with global warming. It could be called, if we were writing a movie script, Death of the Earth. We lived through it in Sandy. We are living through it in things like West Nile disease. We're living through it in elevated food prices from drought-stricken areas. We're living it through wild and crazy weather changes. This is not going to be pleasant stuff. We're looking at a very ugly future. Now, we're looking at this. One of the critical things to understand about global warming is we tend to talk about this as a failure. Human beings have not done X, Y, and Z. The truth is, global warming is a problem of success. We created the world of fossil fuel so we could have this wonderful industrialized world we live in. And we are being asked as human beings now to do the hardest thing human beings can do, which is to turn your back on success. Turning our back on success with the fossil fuel industry means two things. First of all, it means turning our back on an industry that we elevated to make $600 billion a year. And secondly, it means turning our back on a way of life that we've all become accustomed to. But the alternative to doing that enormous and complicated and difficult and messy task is to live through an even more complicated, difficult, and messy period of climate chaos. My best advice to you is, if you have friends in Florida, is don't buy real estate in Florida, because in about 2035, as things are going, we're going to see the biggest immigration out of South Florida since the Okies and the Arkies fled the Dust Bowl. These are the kinds of dimensions of things we're talking about. Now, when my colleagues present their recommendations, I hope you will focus on the fact that one of the great roles New York City has always played in American life is to be a leader, an innovator, and a laboratory of things. Our complexity, our energy, our innovation makes us ideally suited to be that. When I was DEP commissioner, we did three things that are still kind of the gold standard for water management in the United States: the Catskill Watershed Protection Program, the Water Conservation Program, and the green infrastructure programs like the Staten Island Blue Belt. The billions of dollars those programs saved the city we're living off of today. There is no reason why, in sustainability, in energy, New York City cannot find, identify, and carry out similar positions of leadership. That, I believe, is the challenge before us. That, I believe, is the catalytic effect I hope this hearing will have, Mr. Chairman.
Former Commissioner Al Appleton. How well do you think the city is doing to mitigate and adapt to climate change?
I think, first of all, the city should not start by trying to adapt and climate change. The city should start by trying to do its part in stopping climate change. The city is clearly not doing that very well, for reasons I will talk to in my next 3 minutes. The other problem, of course, we have, if we take Sandy as a very particular experience, the response to Sandy has basically been to rebuild in place. Now, there's some obviously important reasons for doing that, but at the same time, we should be looking at areas on the coastal zone that are not yet developed. We should be looking at natural barriers to these things, and we should essentially be trying to do everything we can to move, without being too disruptive to neighborhoods, to move essentially development out of the way of the future. We basically know that we're looking at 3 to 4 feet of ocean rise by the end of this century. That is the lifetime of any house we will now build in those areas. We should be looking at how do we armor our subways. We should be looking at moving utility areas out. I'm currently working on a project in Rockland County where they propose to build a critical water supply facility in the floodplain that was essentially flooded by Sandy. These kinds of decisions have to be stopped. This kind of thinking has to be changed. But the most important thing the city really has to do is, as I said earlier, we have to lead. New York, people look to New York City for leadership, and this is where we can. Let me speak to that for a minute. The 3 presentations you heard were talking about the 2 kinds of things that embed fossil fuel in our culture: externalizing costs and government subsidies. The place to start in addressing climate change is not to pass standards that say we want to hit 80% by 2050, if at the same time we're providing subsidies, as Ruth was pointing out, to using fossil fuel. So the first thing we have to do as a society is we have to get out of the business of subsidizing fossil fuels, and we have to get out of the business of dealing with these external costs. Allowing these kinds of methane leaks, which are paid for as a function of consumer charges to Con Ed, I might add, is a way where we essentially subsidizing the use of fossil fuel. Now, it is clear that the next thing the city needs, which it does not have yet, is a real energy policy. A real policy to address the options with green buildings, with sustainability, and with alternate energy. That is, we basically as a society are very reluctant to take on the fossil fuel infrastructure we've created over 50 to 100 years. Change is difficult, change is scary, but we're going to get change shoved down our throat. We have 2 choices with this change. We can either manage it ourselves, or we can sit back and duck and hope something comes out at the other end. Now, the city currently has a standard of 30% emissions reduction by 2030. This is, I've sworn to tell the truth, pathetically inadequate. I mean, if you can't make 30% by 2030, you should essentially go out of business. This is not essentially a standard at all. What I would like to recommend to this council is that once the march is over and once the mobilization is done, that the place to look for is, I would like to see this council help provoke a public debate on how fast the city of New York can get to being carbon neutral. We know that being sustainable and being carbon neutral will save the city hundreds of millions, if not $billions. So the whole argument for sustainability is you quit wasting environmental resources. You can use the wealth of environmental resources to create a new and a greener economy. This would be a great role for this committee and this council to partake in. This would be a great role for New York City to play for the country, because we know that much of the resistance to accepting global warming is what Erica Jong used to call fear of flying. That is, we need to demonstrate that green energy, sustainability, it not only is better for the environment, it's better for the economy, it's better for our communities, it's better for our public health. New York City is in a position to do this. There are many other details. I think you've heard from many people in the anti-fracking movement. One of the things I hope you will recognize about the anti-fracking movement is the reason it has such influence is it's not just against fracking. It is a movement that is for something. It is for green energy. You're going to hear from other people here today who are connected to that movement. People like Buck and Matt Moorhead, people like Ling Zhao, people like Marge Schaub, people like Paul Goulet from Riverkeeper. These people are all here to talk about the future. Basically, smart people bet on the future. Green energy is the future. Smart people invest in the future. Smart people do not cling to the past. Fossil fuel has been a great run. Look, I love to drive. Where I grew up, if you couldn't drive 400 miles a day and then party all night, you couldn't look an honest woman in the face. But the truth of the matter is, that world's over. We have to create a new world. And creating new worlds can be exciting and profitable and wonderful. And here's why we want to create this new world. This, everybody, is my lovely new granddaughter. She will live to be 82 years or into 2095, which means if you look at all the projections of ocean rise, all the projections of climate change, they will come over her life like a wave if we do not do something about it. That is a challenge for us. I often like to tell my students that in the 1830s, 1840s, and 1850s in the United States, the center of American culture was the South. It was the center of wealth, it was the center of fashion, it was the center of style. We remember nothing of that anymore. All we remember is that was a world founded on an evil, slavery. 150 years, 100 years from now, how will we be remembered? Will they remember any of our accomplishments? Or will they only remember what side we took on wrecking the planet? The council can take a side here. I urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
According to the Global Footprint Network, August 19th was Earth Overshoot Day, the day when humanity has exhausted nature's budget for the year. We use more renewable resources and CO2 sequestration than what the planet can provide for an entire year. Throughout most of history, humanity has used nature's resources to build cities and roads, to provide food and create products, and to absorb our carbon dioxide at a rate that was well within Earth's budget. But in the mid-1970s, we crossed a critical threshold. Human consumption began outstripping what the planet could produce. They calculate the overshoot using 4 key factors. 1, how much we consume. 2, how efficiently products are made. 3, how many of us there are. And 4, how much nature is able to produce. Technology and more intensive inputs have helped expand biological productivity over the years. But that expansion has not come close to keeping pace with the rate at which population and resource demand have expanded. The Global Footprint Network's number is based on United Nations data and uses about 6,000 data points per country and year. For more information, go to www.footprintnetwork.org. An August 26th article in the Washington Post by Annie Fifield and Yuki Oda reported, quote, "A court in Fukushima has ruled that Tokyo Electric Power Company, the Japanese nuclear power plant operator, can be held responsible for the suicide of a woman who became depressed after the 2011 meltdown. She killed herself a few months after the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami caused a nuclear meltdown that forced the Watanabes out of their home and destroyed their livelihood. The ruling is the first in which the struggling utility has been found liable for a suicide resulting from the accident, unquote. Also in the article was a study showing that the rate of thyroid cancer in children has increased in the Fukushima prefecture. The national government said there is no connection, but thyroid cancer in children is extremely rare, or it was before the accident. How much radiation really came out of the Fukushima Daiichi meltdowns since the disaster started on March 11, 2011? Well, the information on the effects on people is sketchy, and since cancer has a latency period, and so many people from the Fukushima prefecture have moved away, and because the government is protecting the nuclear industry there, and because doctors have a gag order on radiation and health effects that is tied to their ability to renew their medical licenses, then the information will remain sketchy. But there are other ways to learn detailed health effects. You may not know that there are wild monkeys living in various forests of Japan, including not too far north of Tokyo. There was a recent article in the prestigious scientific journal Nature about them. Nature has had quite a few articles analyzing the effects of the ongoing accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plants. A recent issue had the results of a year-long study comparing the radioactive elements in a population of monkeys that live about 70 kilometers away from the plants to monkeys of the same species from the Aomori prefecture about 400 kilometers away. It is the first research after a nuclear power plant accident on the health effects of radioactive material on wild primates. They started the study about a year after the first day of the Fukushima disaster and found high levels of radioactive cesium in the muscles of Fukushima monkeys compared to no detectable radioactive cesium at all from the Aomori monkeys. They also had low white blood and low red blood cell counts and less hemoglobin, as you can see in this graphic from the Nature article. The amount of radioactive cesium in the soil soon after the 2011 Fukushima disaster began was huge, tens of thousands of times more than usual. There have been many studies on the health effects of the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. In particular, and I'm going to quote verbatim here, hematological abnormalities such as decreased blood cell count in people living in contaminated areas have been reported as a long-term effect of low-dose radiation exposure. In Fukushima, the radiation dose has been reported to be correlated with the occurrence of abnormalities in butterflies and with decreased abundance of birds, butterflies, and cicadas, unquote. The scientists doing the monkey study used those studies as a sort of jumping off point. Since monkeys and humans are both primates, the study is all too relevant to the effects of nuclear power plant accidents on people. Previous studies have investigated blood cell counts in wild Japanese monkey populations showed no evidence for different hematological values among the population. Hematological, that's blood. It is possible that the low blood cell counts in Fukushima monkeys were caused by infectious diseases or malnutrition. However, it just happens that they have been investigating over 1,000 monkeys captured in Fukushima City since 2008. No findings of infectious diseases that may have reduced blood cell counts. Moreover, fat indices did not vary significantly between Fukushima and Aomori monkeys. That indicates that the low blood cell counts were not caused by malnutrition. Low blood cell count suggests that the immune system has been compromised. Because no cesium was detected in the muscles of Aomori monkeys, the low hematological values in Fukushima monkeys could have therefore been due to the effect of other radioactive materials. Stepanova et al. Conducted hematological studies of Ukrainian children between 1993 and 1998 after the Chernobyl disaster of '86. They observed reduced blood cell counts reduced hemoglobin and reduced platelet counts in these children, and found that the extent of the reduction in each child correlated with the level of radioactive cesium in the soil where they lived. This is like what they observed in the monkey study. The biological half-life of cesium in monkeys is approximately 21 days, which means the amount is statistically zero between 210 and 230 days afterwards, 7 to 8 months. Moisich et al. Conducted an epidemiological study to investigate the risk of leukemia among Europeans affected by the Chernobyl disaster, and found that the risk was clearly higher among small children than among adults. The entire Nature article is online, and there is a huge bibliography attached. So, monkeys, humans, health effects are pretty much identical. So what the nuclear power plant did to the monkeys, it did to the people nearby. If any nuclear power plant has a meltdown in the United States, expect the same results here. That's why they should be shut down. What part of the process are they constructing? They put it on the ground already on the other side?
So even though people in New York City have said, oh, we're against fracked gas, New York City is actually the largest buyer of fracked gas, largest consumer. So this is only going to bring more fracked gas into New York City.
We're here for a greater purpose. That purpose is not just constant, like, whatever, watching TV, going to work, going to school. We got to turn these beaches and these public spaces into schools, and acts of inspiration and courage and kindness and love. So there you go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Democracy that works for all of us. Not just the wealthy and not just the people who are well connected through back roads. I have a vision that we can protect ourselves from hydrofracking and do more than that, move towards a renewable future, use this glorious sun, use our wind, use our water to be the beacon for the country for what we can do with renewable power. Well, I'm an old-fashioned Democrat. I believe you get jobs by investing in our schools, investing in our public infrastructure, investing in renewable energy, building solar farms, building the 21st century transportation. It's not a magic bullet, but those are good jobs, and they also build the necessary infrastructure we need so that small businesses can work on top of that. Because if we can have a small business economy with family farms and small businesses, that's where we thrive. That's the vision of New York. That's what New York is. But to have that, we need to be moving towards universal health care. We need strong infrastructure. We need good schools. We need affordable higher ed. You don't tax break your way to a thriving small business economy.
And yes, that was me on Jon Stewart's Daily Show on Wednesday, August 27th. It was a picture from the Earth Day March, and you'll find 20-some minutes of that march on the Environment TV website. This is Ken Gale for Environment TV Weekly News here in northern Manhattan, New York City, overlooking the Hudson River in Fort Tryon Park. And beautiful place, beautiful vistas, gardens. I recommend everybody come here. Those of you coming in for the climate march, make a side trip up to Fort Tryon Park, northern Manhattan. When the air and water is clean, thank an environmentalist. If not, become one. Enough said.